I never thought my own HOA would be capable of theft, especially not the kind that involved illegally siphoning off a natural resource from my property. But here I was, standing in my backyard in Cedar Falls, Iowa, staring at the spot where my spring used to bubble up clear and cold from the earth. My name is Xavier Morrison, and I had bought this 5-acre property specifically because of that spring. When I moved here 3 years ago, the realtor had made a big deal about it, telling me how rare it was to have natural spring water on private land, how previous owners had used it for everything from drinking water to irrigating their gardens. The spring produced about 50 gallons per hour, more than enough for my needs, and the water quality tests I had run showed it was pristine. I'd even installed a small collection system that fed into my house, supplementing my well water and saving me money on my water bill. But about 6 months ago, I started noticing something strange. The flow from my spring had decreased dramatically. What had once been a steady stream was now barely a trickle. At first, I thought maybe we were in a drought, but when I checked the local weather data, rainfall had been normal, even above average. My well was fine, my neighbors were not reporting any issues, and there was no logical explanation for why my spring would suddenly dry up. I spent weeks trying to figure it out. I dug around the spring head, checking for blockages or collapsed underground passages. I consulted with a hydrologist who charged me $800 to tell me that there was no geological reason for the decrease in flow. He did mention, however, that the pressure seemed off, like something was drawing water from the source before it could reach the surface at my collection point. That is when I started paying attention to what was happening beyond my property line. The Whispering Pines. Homeowners Association had always been a thorn in my side. When I bought the house, I'd not realized just how controlling they would be. My property was technically at the edge of the development, with most of my 5 acres extending into what used to be farmland before the developers bought it up. The HOA controlled the common areas, which included a small park, a community center, and various landscaped spaces throughout the neighborhood. About 8 months ago, right around the time my spring started diminishing, the HOA had announced a beautification project. They were installing a large decorative fountain in the Central Park area, which was about 300 yards from my back property line. I had not thought much about it at the time. Fountains were common in these developments, and I figured they would just hook it up to the municipal water supply like everything else. But then I started noticing something odd during my walks through the neighborhood. The fountain ran constantly, which seemed wasteful, and the HOA president, a woman named Brenda Hutchison, kept bragging at community meetings about how the fountain barely cost anything to operate. She kept saying it was a triumph of efficient design and smart planning. Brenda was exactly the kind of HOA president you would expect from a horror story. She was in her mid-50s, always wore pantsuits even to casual neighborhood gatherings, and had short blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." She had been president for 7 years, running essentially unopposed because nobody else wanted to deal with the headache. Her vice president was a woman named Patricia Delgado, who was equally irritating, but at least had the decency to occasionally admit when they were wrong about something. The rest of the board was made up of people who just went along with whatever Brenda said. I decided to do some investigating. One evening in late October, after the sun had set, I took a walk through the common area with a flashlight. The fountain was impressive, I had to admit. It was a 3-tiered stone structure with water cascading down from the top level, creating a pleasant sound that probably made the nearby homeowners happy. But I was not interested in the aesthetics. I wanted to know where the water was coming from. I followed the park's perimeter, looking for any signs of water lines or utility connections. The municipal water meter for the common area was located near the community center, about 100 yards from the fountain. I had walked past it dozens of times. On a hunch, I checked the meter reading, took a photo, and made a note to check it again in a few days. 3 days later, I returned and checked the meter again. The reading had barely changed. For a fountain that ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that made no sense. Either the fountain was using almost no water, which was physically impossible given its size and flow rate, or it was getting water from somewhere else. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about my dying spring, about the timing of the fountain installation, about Brenda's smug comments about operating costs. The next morning, I started doing real detective work. I went to the county clerk's office and pulled the permits for the HOA's fountain project. The permit application showed plans for connecting to the municipal water supply with all the proper specifications and approvals, but permits could be filed with good intentions and then ignored during actual construction. I needed to know what had really been built. I spent the next week carefully mapping out my property and the surrounding area. Using old survey maps and my own GPS measurements, I tried to figure out the underground topology. My spring originated from an aquifer that ran roughly northwest to southeast under my property. If someone wanted to tap into that same water source, they would need to drill or dig in a way that intercepted the flow before it reached my collection point. The fountain was northwest of my spring. If someone had run a pipe from the fountain area toward my property, hitting the right depth and angle, they could theoretically tap into the same underground water source that fed my spring. It would explain everything: the decreased flow at my spring head, the fountain's impossibly low operating costs, and why the municipal meter was not moving. I needed proof. I could not just go around making accusations without evidence, especially not against someone like Brenda Hutchison, who would crucify me in front of the entire neighborhood if I was wrong. I hired a private surveying company to do a ground-penetrating radar scan of my property and the adjacent common area. It cost me $2,000, but it was worth it. When the results came back, I felt my blood pressure spike. There, clear as day on the GPR images, was a pipe running from the direction of the fountain, crossing under the property line onto my land, and terminating right at the point where my spring source originated underground. Those bastards had actually done it. They had drilled into my property, tapped my spring water, and piped it to their fountain. They had literally stolen a natural resource from my land. I immediately contacted a lawyer. Her name was Linda Harper, and she specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. She looked over my evidence, the GPR scans, the water flow measurements, the permit documents, and she gave me a grim smile. "Dull. This is theft of a natural resource, trespassing, and unauthorized use of private property," she said. "Depending on how you want to play this, you could sue them for damages, file criminal complaints, or both. But I have to warn you, HOA cases can get nasty. Are you prepared for this fight?" I told her I was. Nobody steals from me and gets away with it. Linda sent a formal letter to the HOA board on November 15th, outlining our findings and demanding immediate cessation of water usage from my spring, removal of the illegal pipe, and compensation for the water they had already stolen. The letter gave them 10 days to respond. Brenda's response came in 7 days, and it was exactly what I expected. She denied everything. According to her letter, the fountain was connected to municipal water. Any pipes on my property were my own responsibility, and she implied that I was making frivolous accusations to harass the HOA. She even had the audacity to suggest that if my spring was dying, it was due to my own mismanagement of the land. That was when I decided to take matters into my own hands, not in a violent or illegal way, but in a way that would immediately demonstrate the truth of my claims. I spent the next week carefully excavating on my own property, following the path of the illegal pipe using the GPR scan as my guide. Iowa was having a mild November, which made the digging easier than it could have been. I worked mostly in the early mornings and late evenings, not because I was doing anything wrong, but because I did not want Brenda or her cronies showing up and trying to stop me before I found what I was looking for. On November 28th, about 4 feet down in my own backyard, my shovel hit something hard. I carefully cleared away the soil and found it, a 2-inch PVC pipe running in a perfectly straight line from the direction of the HOA park toward my spring source. I followed it in both directions, confirming that it indeed connected to the underground spring and led back toward the fountain. I took probably 50 photographs from every angle, with timestamps and GPS coordinates embedded in the metadata. Then I called Linda and told her to get over to my house as fast as she could. She arrived within an hour, along with a notary public she had brought to witness and document what we were about to find. Together, we fully exposed a 20-foot section of the pipe. It was new PVC, probably less than a year old, and it had been professionally installed. This was not some amateur hour operation. Someone had hired professionals to do this, which meant there was a paper trail somewhere. "This is all the evidence we need," Linda said, taking her own photographs. "This is criminal theft. You should call the sheriff's department and file a report." But I had a better idea. If I called the cops now, they would investigate, sure, but the HOA would lawyer up and the whole thing would drag out for months. I wanted immediate, undeniable proof that this pipe was feeding their fountain. "I am cutting it," I said. Linda looked at me. "It is your property, your water source, and an illegal pipe. You have every right to remove it, but if you do this, you need to document everything. Make sure there's no question about what you are doing and why." I set up my phone to record video, had Linda do the same, and then I went to my garage and got my reciprocating saw. On camera, I stated the date, time, and location, explained that I was removing an illegal pipe that had been installed on my property without my permission, and that this pipe had been stealing water from my natural spring. Then, I cut through the PVC in 2 places, removing a 3-foot section of pipe. Water immediately began gushing from the end that led back toward the fountain. It was under significant pressure, which made sense because they had drilled down to tap directly into the pressurized aquifer. I let it flow for a few minutes while we filmed. Then I capped both ends of the cut pipe with the proper fittings I had bought for this exact purpose. "Now we wait," I said. It took less than 2 hours. The fountain apparently had no backup water source. When the flow from my spring stopped, the fountain started running dry. By early afternoon, my phone was ringing. It was Brenda. "What did you do?" she shrieked into the phone. "The fountain is broken and someone saw you digging in your yard. If you sabotaged HOA property, I will have you arrested." I kept my voice calm. "Brenda, I did not touch HOA property. I was working on my own land. If your fountain is not working, maybe you should check your municipal water connection. Is not that what you have been claiming it uses?" There was a long silence. Then she hung up. Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. Brenda sent me a violation notice claiming that my excavation was unsightly and violated HOA rules about yard maintenance. I sent her a response through Linda, reminding her that the excavation was on my property and that I was in the process of repairing damage caused by trespassers. I also mentioned that I had filed a report with the Benton County Sheriff's Department regarding theft of natural resources and trespassing. That last part got her attention. 2 days after I filed the police report, a deputy came out to my property to take my statement and look at the evidence. His name was Deputy Martinez, and he was thorough. I showed him the excavated pipe, the GPR scans, the water flow data from before and after the fountain installation, and the photographs of everything. I also gave him copies of the HOA's permit applications, which showed they had claimed they would use municipal water. "This is pretty straightforward," he said. "They installed a pipe on your property without permission, tapped your water source, and used it for their own purposes. That is theft. The value of the water they have stolen over the past 6 months is probably significant. Do you have any idea how much we are talking about?" I had done the math. At current municipal water rates in Cedar Falls, the water they had stolen was worth approximately $5,000. That was enough to move this from a simple property dispute into criminal territory. Deputy Martinez took his report and said the case would be forwarded to the county attorney's office for review. In Iowa, theft of property valued over $1,000 is a serious misdemeanor, and if it exceeded $10,000, it could be charged as a felony. The district attorney would have to decide how to proceed. Meanwhile, the HOA was in chaos. Without my spring water feeding it, their fountain was completely non-functional. Brenda tried to have it connected to the municipal supply as originally planned, but when the contractors came out and looked at the setup, they realized that nobody had actually installed the proper connection during the original construction. The fountain had been designed to use municipal water, but instead of following through with that plan, someone had decided it would be cheaper to just steal mine. At the next HOA meeting in mid-December, I attended specifically to watch the fireworks. The meeting was held at the community center, and probably 40 homeowners showed up, which was triple the normal attendance. Everyone wanted to know what was going on with the fountain. Brenda tried to control the narrative. She stood at the front of the room, looking flustered, and explained that there had been complications with the fountain's water supply and that they were working to resolve the issue. She did not mention anything about the illegal pipe or my spring. I raised my hand. "Brenda, would you like to tell everyone the real reason the fountain is not working?" Her face went red. "Mr. Morrison, this is not the time for personal grievances." "It is not a personal grievance," I said, standing up so everyone could see me. "The fountain is not working because for the past 6 months, it has been stealing water from the natural spring on my property. The HOA installed an illegal pipe that trespassed on my land, tapped my spring, and diverted the water to the fountain. I discovered the theft, removed the illegal pipe from my property, and filed a police report. That is why the fountain is not working." The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. Several people immediately turned to Brenda, demanding to know if this was true. Others started asking about the legal implications and whether the HOA could be sued. A few people looked at me like I was the bad guy for shutting off the fountain, but most seemed appropriately outraged that the board had done something so obviously illegal. Patricia Delgado, the vice president, looked like she wanted to disappear. She kept shaking her head and muttering something under her breath. I later learned that she had not known about the illegal tap. Brenda had apparently worked with the developer and a contractor to install the pipe without informing the full board of what they were really doing. "This is absurd," Brenda said, trying to regain control of the room. "Mr. Morrison is making wild accusations without proof." I pulled out my phone. "I have ground-penetrating radar scans, photographs of the illegal pipe, video of me removing it from my property, witness statements, and a police report. Would you like me to email copies to everyone here?" The room went silent. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then sat down without another word. The rest of the meeting was a disaster for the board. Homeowners demanded a full accounting of how this had happened, who had authorized it, and what other shady things the board might be doing. Several people called for Brenda's resignation. She refused, insisting that she had been acting in the best interests of the community by finding a cost-effective water source for the fountain. "You stole from a homeowner," someone shouted. "How is that in the best interests of the community?" Brenda had no good answer for that. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me and apologized. They said they had no idea what was happening and that they supported me completely. A few people even mentioned that they had been suspicious of how cheap the fountain was to operate, but had not thought to question it further. 2 weeks later, right before Christmas, I got a call from Linda. The county attorney's office had decided to press charges. Brenda Hutchison and the HOA's contracted developer, a man named Roger Stanley, were both being charged with theft in the 4th degree and criminal trespass. The charges were serious misdemeanors, carrying potential jail time and significant fines. "They are also offering you a settlement in the civil case," Linda said. "The HOA's insurance company wants to avoid a trial. They are offering $25,000 in damages, full removal of the pipe from your property at their expense, restoration of any land disturbed by the excavation, and a guarantee that the HOA will never again attempt to access your spring water." I considered it. $25,000 was more than fair. It covered my expenses, the value of the stolen water, compensation for my time and stress, and then some. But I wanted to make sure this could never happen again. "Add a clause that any future HOA board members must be informed in writing about this incident and the settlement terms," I said. "I want it in the permanent HOA record so nobody can try this again in 10 years after everyone forgets." Linda added the clause. The HOA agreed. We settled the civil case on January 8th. The criminal case was more complicated. Brenda hired a lawyer and fought the charges, claiming she had not known the water source was on my property. Her story was that Roger Stanley, the developer, had told her they were tapping into a natural spring that was on the common area land, not my private property. She claimed she had been misled and was therefore not criminally liable. Roger Stanley, meanwhile, cut a deal. He admitted that he had surveyed the area, knew the spring originated on my property, and had convinced Brenda that it was legal because the water was part of a shared aquifer. According to his statement, Brenda had been hesitant at first, but had gone along with it when he assured her it would save the HOA thousands of dollars per year in water costs. The case went to trial in March. I had to testify, which was nerve-wracking but also satisfying. I explained how I had discovered the theft, documented everything, and ultimately removed the illegal pipe from my property. The prosecutor used my photographs, the GPR scans, and expert testimony from the hydrologist I had consulted to demonstrate that the spring was unquestionably on my property, and that the pipe had been installed deliberately to access it. Brenda's defense was weak. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had relied on expert advice from Roger Stanley and therefore lacked criminal intent. But the prosecutor pointed out that Brenda had never obtained proper surveys, never asked for my permission, and had lied to homeowners about where the water was coming from. Even if she had believed the spring was on common area property, which was doubtful, she had never done the due diligence required before accessing it. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and found Brenda guilty on both counts. Roger Stanley, having already pleaded guilty, was sentenced to 90 days in jail, suspended on the condition that he complete 200 hours of community service and pay restitution. Brenda was sentenced to 60 days in jail, also suspended, with 150 hours of community service and 3 years of probation. More importantly for the HOA, both of them were ordered to pay restitution to cover the costs of removing the pipe, restoring my property, and compensating me for the stolen water. The total came to about $35,000, split between them. The HOA's insurance covered most of it, but Brenda and Roger both had to pay their deductibles, which I heard was a significant financial hit for both of them. Brenda resigned as HOA president 2 weeks after the sentencing. Patricia took over temporarily and immediately instituted new rules requiring full board approval and proper legal review before any major construction projects. The fountain was eventually connected to the municipal water supply as originally intended, though it cost the HOA an extra $12,000 to do it right. Many homeowners were furious about the extra expense, but it was a necessary lesson. My spring, meanwhile, recovered almost immediately after I cut off the illegal pipe. Within a week, the flow had returned to its original 50 gallons per hour. I reinforced the spring head, installed better collection systems, and even put in a small monitoring setup so I could track the flow rate and water quality remotely. If anyone ever tried to tamper with it again, I would know immediately. The whole ordeal taught me several important lessons about HOAs, property rights, and the importance of documentation. If I had not taken the time to properly investigate, gather evidence, and document everything, I would never have been able to prove what was happening. And if I had not been willing to stand up for my rights, even when it was uncomfortable and confrontational, the HOA would have continued stealing from me indefinitely. In May, about a year after I first noticed the decrease in my spring flow, I received a letter from the new HOA board. It was a formal apology, signed by Patricia and the other board members, acknowledging what had happened and thanking me for bringing the matter to light. They also included a check for $500 as a gesture of goodwill, which I donated to a local environmental conservation charity. Things settled down after that. The neighborhood returned to normal, though Brenda Hutchison became something of a pariah. She still lived in the development, but people avoided her at community events. She eventually put her house up for sale and moved to Arizona, which was probably for the best. Roger Stanley's contracting business took a major hit from the criminal conviction. Several clients dropped him, and he ended up closing his company and taking a job working for someone else. I did not feel bad for him. He had known exactly what he was doing when he tapped my spring, and he had paid the price for it. As for me, I continued living on my 5 acres, enjoying my spring water and keeping a close eye on everything the HOA did. I even joined the board for a term, just to make sure they were operating transparently and legally. It was tedious work, but someone had to do it. The fountain still runs today, properly connected to municipal water. Every time I walk past it, I think about how close they came to getting away with their theft. If I had been less observant, less persistent, or less willing to fight back, they would still be using my water and I would have never known the truth. But I did know. And I did fight back. And in the end, justice was served. Living in an HOA-controlled neighborhood can be challenging. There are rules about everything from lawn height to paint colors, and the people who end up in charge are not always the most reasonable or ethical individuals. But property rights are property rights, and natural resources like springs are valuable assets that belong to the landowner. Nobody has the right to take those things without permission, no matter how convenient or cost-effective it might be. My advice to anyone dealing with an HOA dispute is simple. Document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. Get professionals involved when necessary, whether that is lawyers, surveyors, or law enforcement. And most importantly, do not let anyone bully you into accepting something that is clearly wrong. The funny thing is, after everything was settled, my relationship with most of my neighbors actually improved. People respected that I had stood up to the board and exposed their corruption. Several homeowners told me privately that they had always suspected Brenda was up to something shady, but had not wanted to rock the boat. My case gave them confidence to question board decisions and demand transparency. The new board, under Patricia's leadership, was much better. They held open meetings, shared financial information freely, and made sure all projects were properly vetted before moving forward. The neighborhood became a more pleasant place to live, and ironically, the HOA became more functional after the scandal than it had been before. I still think about that moment when I first cut through the pipe in my backyard. The rush of water that came out, the satisfaction of knowing I had found the source of the problem, and the certainty that I was doing the right thing. It was one of those clear-cut situations where there was a right side and a wrong side, and I was fortunate enough to have the evidence to prove which was which. Natural springs are a gift. They provide clean, fresh water straight from the earth, filtered through layers of rock and soil over years or decades. In many parts of the world, access to clean water is a life or death issue. Even here in Iowa, where water is relatively abundant, it is still a valuable resource that should not be wasted or stolen. When the HOA tapped my spring, they were not just stealing water. They were stealing a piece of my property's value, its unique character, and my rights as a landowner. They were also setting a dangerous precedent that could have encouraged other similar behavior if left unchallenged. By the time spring rolled around that next year, my property was back to normal. The excavation site had been properly filled and grassed over. My spring flowed strong and clear. The fountain in the park ran on municipal water, as it should have from the beginning. And Brenda Hutchison was somewhere in Arizona, hopefully learning from her mistakes. I even installed a small decorative pond near my spring, using some of the settlement money. It is a peaceful spot where I can sit and listen to the water bubble up from the ground. Sometimes I think about the absurdity of the whole situation, how someone could think it was acceptable to drill onto a neighbor's property and steal their water, how it took months of investigation to uncover something that should have never happened in the first place, how a simple fountain became the center of criminal charges and a neighborhood scandal. But mostly, I just enjoy the sound of the water and the satisfaction of knowing that I protected what was mine. That is what property ownership is really about, not just having a place to live, but having the right to control what happens on your land and to stop others from taking advantage of you. The legal system worked, eventually. The police took my complaint seriously, the prosecutor pursued the case, and the jury made the right decision. It was not fast and it was not easy, but justice was served. Brenda and Roger faced real consequences for their actions, and the HOA learned an expensive lesson about following the law. I have told this story to several friends and family members over the past year, and the reactions are always similar. People are shocked that an HOA would do something so blatantly illegal. They are surprised that the theft went on for months before I figured it out, and they are impressed that I took the time to properly investigate and document everything before taking action. The truth is, I did not have much choice. Once I realized what was happening, I could not just let it go. It was not about the money, though the water they stole did have real value. It was about the principle. It was about standing up for what was right and making sure that people who break the rules face consequences. Looking back, I think the turning point was when I decided to cut the pipe myself rather than waiting for the legal system to slowly grind through the process. That immediate, decisive action forced everyone's hand. The HOA could not deny the connection anymore once their fountain stopped working. Brenda could not claim I was making things up once I had physical evidence, and the police had to take the case seriously once there was clear proof of theft. Some people have asked me if I was worried about legal liability when I cut the pipe. After all, even though it was on my property, I was still cutting something that the HOA had installed. But Linda had been clear. I had every right to remove an illegal structure from my property. The pipe was not permitted, it was not authorized, and it was actively stealing from me. Removing it was not vandalism or sabotage, it was protecting my property rights. The whole experience has made me much more cautious about HOA activities. I now read every notice they send out, attend more meetings than I probably need to, and keep an eye on any construction or modifications in the common areas. I am not paranoid, but I am vigilant, and I think that is how every homeowner in an HOA should be. HOAs can serve a useful purpose. They maintain common areas, enforce basic standards, and provide amenities that individual homeowners could not afford on their own. But they also have significant power over people's lives and property, and that power can be abused. The only way to prevent abuse is for homeowners to stay informed, ask questions, and hold board members accountable. In the years since this all happened, I have become something of an informal advisor for other homeowners in the neighborhood who have disputes with the HOA. Nothing as dramatic as water theft, thankfully, but plenty of smaller issues where people need guidance on how to navigate the rules and stand up for their rights. I am happy to help. The more homeowners understand their rights and the HOA's limitations, the better the community functions. The spring continues to flow, constant and reliable, just as it has probably done for hundreds or thousands of years. The aquifer beneath my property does not care about HOA politics or property disputes. It just exists, slowly filtering water through layers of rock and sand, emerging at the surface where geology permits. I'm lucky to have it on my land, and I am grateful that I was able to protect it. Every time I fill a glass with water from my spring, I think about how close I came to losing it. Not permanently, of course, but to having it diminished and exploited by people who had no right to it. That cold, clean water tastes a little sweeter now, knowing that I fought for it and won. The fountain in the park still runs, and honestly, it is a nice addition to the neighborhood. Children play around it in the summer, and it creates a pleasant focal point for the common area. I do not begrudge the community having it. I just wish they had done it right from the beginning. If Brenda and Roger had simply connected it to municipal water as planned, none of this would have been necessary. They would have saved themselves criminal charges, the HOA would have saved tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and restitution, and I would have been spared months of stress and investigation. But they made their choices, and they paid the price. That is how it should be. Actions have consequences, even for HOA presidents who think they are above the rules. As I sit here now, more than a year after I first noticed my spring slowing down, I can say with confidence that the whole ordeal was worth it. Not because I wanted the conflict or enjoyed the legal battle, but because I protected something important. My property, my rights, and my access to a natural resource that is increasingly rare and valuable. Water is life. It is not just a commodity to be bought and sold or stolen when convenient. It is essential, precious, and worth fighting for. My spring taught me that lesson, and I will never forget it. The neighborhood is quieter now. The scandal has faded into history. New people have moved in who barely know the story. The fountain runs, the park is beautiful, and life goes on. But I remember, and I make sure to walk past that spring head every day just to hear the water bubbling up from the earth, knowing that it is mine and that it is safe. That is my story. That is how my HOA tried to steal my spring water and how I caught them, cut them off, and made them pay for their crime. It is a story about property rights, about standing up to bullies, and about the importance of documentation and persistence. But most of all, it is a story about water, that most basic and essential element of life, and how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. I hope anyone reading this takes away a few lessons. First, pay attention to what is happening on and around your property. Second, document everything if something seems wrong. Third, do not be afraid to stand up for your rights, even when it is difficult or uncomfortable. And fourth, natural resources like springs are valuable and worth protecting. My spring flows strong today, 50 gallons per hour, every day. It is a constant reminder that some things are worth fighting for, and that justice, though sometimes slow, can still prevail. The HOA learned their lesson, Brenda and Roger paid their price, and I got my water back. In the end, that's all I really wanted. Not revenge, not fame, just my water and my rights. And I got both.